busy stretch of highway, where the honks of impatient drivers and the screech of tires blended into a chorus of urban life. A small, scruffy dog stood like a sentinel at the edge of the road. Her ribs were visible beneath her thin fur, each breath shallow, as if every movement took everything from her. She was tired, hungry, and desperate, but she was also determined. Her eyes darted nervously from one passing vehicle to another, every muscle in her body tense, with the instinctual understanding that her puppies, her tiny, defenseless babies, were depending on her. She had no name, no collar to identify her, just a survival instinct that had been honed over the years on the streets. To most passers-by, she was just another stray, another unfortunate animal that was a part of the urban landscape, blending into the background noise of everyday life. But to few, she was something more, something worth noticing. The wind blew in waves, ruffling her matted fur as she paced back and forth. Her tiny puppies, barely a week old, were nestled in a makeshift den under a dilapidated wooden crate beside a rundown gas station. They had no protection from the outside world, no safe haven, and they were still too young to understand the danger that surrounded them. The mother's heart ached as she heard their faint whimpers, tiny bodies shivering under the warmth of her protection. She had to do something. She had to keep them safe. The world around her was indifferent. The road was chaotic, filled with speeding cars that paid no heed to the vulnerable creatures that lived on its edge. Her instincts screamed for her to run, to flee with her puppies to a place where they could hide. But there was no such place. She had no refuge. So she stood. She stood between her babies and the world, a silent guardian in the face of overwhelming odds. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the incessant noise of traffic, yet to her, it felt like the calm before the storm. She was fully aware that the road was no place for puppies, and she had failed in her attempts to lead them to safety, but her instinct to protect them overpowered any fear. Her mind raced with thoughts of how she could keep them out of harm's way, how she could shield them from the speeding vehicles that zoomed past. Her ears perked as the roar of an approaching car grew louder. The engine revved with urgency, and she knew that her time was running out. She needed to act fast. She moved closer to the center of the road, her heart pounding as she positioned herself between her puppies and the oncoming danger. She barked once sharp, high-pitched, a desperate plea for the cars to slow down to see her babies. But the vehicles just sped on, oblivious to her presence. But just as she prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for her children, something unexpected happened. A car slowed down, not just a little enough for the driver to notice the dog and her plight. The car came to a full stop just a few feet away from her, the engine idling as the driver, a man in his late 30s, stared through the windshield in disbelief. His name was Jack. He was tired, just another man, rushing to get home after a long day at work. But the sight of the dog, her eyes wide with terror and determination, made his heart drop into his stomach. Jack had never been the type to feel particularly compassionate towards stray animals. He'd seen them before: cats meandering in alleyways, dogs rummaging through trash. But something about this dog, the way she stood there, so resolute, so filled with love for her puppies, hit him like a thunderclap. Without thinking, he pulled over to the side of the road and parked his car. He wasn't sure why, he just felt compelled to do something. He stepped out, his boots crunching on the gravel, and walked cautiously toward the dog. The dog, sensing his movement, didn't retreat. Instead, she held her ground, her body tense, her posture one of both protection and pleading. Jack knelt down slowly, his gaze fixed on the puppies under the crate, now squirming and yelping in hunger. His heart clenched. He had seen suffering before on the streets, in the eyes of those who had nothing. But this was different. This was the raw, unyielding love of a mother. He took a deep breath and pulled a sandwich from his bag, one he had meant to eat on the road. Without hesitation, he tore off a piece of the bread and held it out. The dog, after a long moment of hesitation, stepped forward and sniffed the offering, her eyes darting back to her puppies. Jack could see the war in her eyes: hunger, yes, but also the desire to protect. She hadn't yet fully trusted him, but she was desperate. Jack slowly placed the rest of the sandwich on the ground, a safe distance from her puppies, and backed away, giving her space. He could only hope she would eat, that she would allow herself to be vulnerable for a moment, just long enough for him to figure out how to help. It took only a few seconds before she moved forward, her thin body shaking slightly as she sniffed the sandwich once more. Then, as if realizing there was no harm, she devoured it with a hunger that made Jack's heart ache. But Jack didn't stop there. He knew that feeding the dog wasn't enough. He couldn't just drive away and forget about her. The car had stopped, yes, but what would happen when it was time to leave? The road was still a dangerous place, and he had no idea where this dog had come from, or if there were any other predators lurking nearby. Without a second thought, Jack pulled out his phone and dialed the number for animal control. As he waited for the call to connect, he stayed crouched by the dog's side, trying to make himself as non-threatening as possible. The dog, now feeling a little more at ease, allowed him to stroke her fur gently, but she still remained watchful, her eyes darting nervously toward her puppies. When animal control arrived, the dog was hesitant at first, but allowed them to approach. She didn't put up a fight. She knew, perhaps instinctively, that this was her chance to save her puppies. Jack watched in silence as the officers gently coaxed the dog into a crate, her puppies bundled up nearby. She let out a soft whine, but Jack was right there, offering comfort with a soft pat on her head. As the dog and her puppies were loaded into the truck, Jack felt a mix of emotions: relief, sadness, and a sense of deep gratitude. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a testament to the kindness of strangers, to the power of compassion and to the enduring strength of a mother's love. Jack got into his car, his heart full, but as he started the engine, he couldn't shake the image of that dog standing so bravely in front of her babies. He knew he would never forget it. The next day, Jack went to the shelter to check on the dog and her puppies. They were safe, settled into a warm room with plenty of food and water. And as he sat there, watching the puppies tumble over each other, playing with the little toy he had brought for them, Jack realized that he had been changed. He had witnessed something extraordinary that day, the raw love of a mother for her young, and the way that love had brought him, a stranger, to act. The dog had shown him what it truly meant to protect, to love, and to sacrifice. And in turn, Jack had learned that sometimes the smallest acts of kindness can have the most profound impact on a life as days passed. The small shelter where the dog, whom Jack had come to know as Bella, and her puppies were taken slowly, became their sanctuary. The quiet hum of the shelter's fluorescent lights, the soft rustle of bedsheets, and the occasional sound of the puppies' playful whimpers filled the air. The shelter was a far cry from the chaos of the busy road, where danger loomed at every corner. Here, in this small haven, Bella's world had changed forever. She was no longer a stray, wandering the streets in search of scraps or shelter. She had found something greater, something she never expected, a sense of safety, and the chance to give her puppies a better life. But despite the warmth of the shelter, the staff's care, and the comforting presence of other animals, Bella remained haunted by the memory of the road. Every time she laid her head down to rest, her ears would twitch at the faintest sound of a passing vehicle. Her instincts, honed through a lifetime of hardship, could never let her forget the dangers that lurked beyond the walls. And in the stillness of the night, when the shelter was quiet and the world outside lay bathed in moonlight, Bella would often stare out of the small window, her eyes distant and filled with a quiet longing. Jack continued to visit Bella every day after work. At first, he'd come just to check on her, checking to see if she was eating well, if her puppies were growing strong. But soon, those visits became something more than mere obligation. He found himself looking forward to them, not out of duty, but out of something deeper. Bella had taught him something he hadn't expected. He had always lived in a world where everything had a price, where the hustle of everyday life kept him moving forward without stopping to reflect. But Bella's quiet courage, her unconditional love for her puppies, her unwavering loyalty to them, had shifted something inside him. He would sit in the corner of the shelter's visiting room, observing her with a soft smile. Bella, for her part, was still cautious with him. She hadn't forgotten the stranger who had offered her food by the side of the road, but she wasn't ready to fully trust him either. Every now and then, when Jack would reach out to stroke her fur, she would flinch just slightly, but enough for Jack to notice. It wasn't because she didn't like him. It was because she had learned the harsh reality of the world. She had been abandoned, betrayed, and hurt before. Trust was no longer something she could give freely. It had to be earned. Jack understood that. And so he waited. Each visit, he would come and sit by her side, offering her food, never pushing her, never demanding affection. He would simply be there, a constant presence in the quiet world she had come to know. And slowly, Bella began to relax. The tension in her body began to ease, and one day, after a particularly long stretch of silence, she finally nudged her head against his leg. It was a small gesture, but it meant the world to Jack. He smiled softly, reaching down to gently stroke her head. From that day on, Bella and Jack shared a silent understanding. There were no words needed, only the quiet moments they spent together. Bella's puppies, growing rapidly, had begun to explore the world around them. They had grown strong, and each day they became more curious, more playful. It wasn't long before Jack found himself falling in love with them too. He would laugh at their antics, their clumsy attempts to chase one another, their eyes full of wonder at every new thing they discovered. But even as the puppies grew, Jack knew that there was still much to be done. Bella and her babies couldn't stay in the shelter forever. They needed a permanent home, a place where they could truly belong. Jack, unsure of what to do, spoke with the shelter staff. He learned that, unfortunately, Bella's story was not unique. There were many like her dogs abandoned, left to fend for themselves on the streets, some never finding their way to safety. He learned that the shelter was often overcrowded, and while it provided a safe place for animals like Bella, it wasn't the same as having a family of their own. Jack's heart sank as he realized that despite all the progress Bella had made, there was still so much more to be done. One evening, after a particularly heartfelt visit, Jack stood outside the shelter, Bella by his side. He looked up at the sky, his thoughts racing. He had the power to change Bella's life, to give her the family she deserved. But how? He had his own life, his own responsibilities, and he didn't know if he was ready for the challenge of adopting a dog and her puppies. He knew he wasn't the only one who could help, but there was something deep inside him that said he should be the one. After all, it was he who had seen Bella's need, who had recognized her silent plea for help on that busy road. A few days later, Jack made a decision. He walked into the shelter and sat down with the adoption coordinator. "I want to adopt Bella and her puppies," he said, his voice steady. The coordinator, a kind woman named Laura, smiled warmly. She had seen Jack's dedication to Bella, the way he had come day after day to check on her progress. She had seen how Jack's presence had slowly helped Bella heal. "I think that's a wonderful idea," Laura said, her voice filled with warmth. "We'll start the process right away." Jack's heart raced with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. It wasn't going to be easy, he knew. But as the days passed and the adoption process was finalized, he couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose he had never known before. Bella and her puppies were now his responsibility. He was going to give them the home they had always deserved. The next week, Jack brought Bella and her puppies to their new home. The house was small but cozy, and he had spent the last few days preparing it for their arrival. The moment Bella stepped through the door, she looked around cautiously, but something in her eyes changed. There was a flicker of hope that perhaps, just perhaps, this would be their forever home. Jack had created a safe space for them, a place where Bella could finally relax, a place where her puppies could grow up without fear of the street. And as the days passed, Jack's life began to change in ways he couldn't have predicted. Bella and her puppies filled his days with joy, their presence bringing a sense of peace that Jack had longed for. Bella, once wary and distrustful, began to open up to him, her bond with him growing stronger each day. She would sit by his side in the evenings, resting her head on his lap, her body finally relaxed, at peace in a way she had never known before. For the first time in her life, Bella knew what it was to be truly loved, and Jack, for the first time in his life, understood the power of unconditional love. The bond between them was simple but profound. Bella had given him more than he could ever repay. She had taught him the true meaning of compassion, the kind of compassion that transcends words, that requires nothing in return. It was a love that came from the heart, raw and pure, just like the love she had for her puppies, and the love that Jack now had for them all. And as the sun set each evening, casting long shadows over their home, Jack couldn't help but think back to the day when he had first seen Bella on that busy road. Her eyes filled with fear and determination. He knew deep in his heart that that moment had been fate. It had led him to this, a new life, a new family, and a love that would last forever. Months passed, and Jack, Bella, and the puppies settled into their new routine. The house, once quiet and somewhat lonely, was now filled with the sounds of playful barks, puppy paws scurrying across the floor, and Bella's soft, contented sighs as she napped beside Jack on the couch. He couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed since that fateful day on the busy road. From a stray dog with a deep, unspoken fear of the world, Bella had transformed into a happy, confident dog, one who knew she was safe, loved, and protected. Jack's life had also changed in ways he hadn't anticipated. He had always been someone who focused on work, deadlines, and the constant rush of daily life. But now, every day felt like a reminder of what truly mattered: love, loyalty, and the simple joy of being present. He had learned to slow down, to appreciate the small moments that made life worth living. Each time he looked into Bella's eyes, he was reminded of how far they had come together. She had not only healed from her past, but had also healed him in ways he didn't know he needed. As the puppies grew older, they became more energetic and curious. They would tumble and play in the yard, chasing each other in wild spirals, tumbling over their tiny legs and barking in pure joy. Bella, though once protective and cautious, now watched over them with a calm sense of pride. She had transformed from the scared, hungry dog on the side of the road into a mother who knew her role, one of care, love, and protection. Jack had seen her grow in ways that mirrored the growth of her puppies, and he marveled at how nature, in all its beauty, had brought them together. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the yard, Jack sat outside with Bella and her puppies. He watched them play, their innocent excitement a beautiful reminder of how far they had come. Bella trotted around, keeping a watchful eye on her puppies, occasionally stopping to nudge them gently when they ventured too far. Jack smiled as he leaned back in his chair, savoring the peaceful moment. Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket. It was a message from Laura, the adoption coordinator at the shelter where he had first met Bella. He had kept in touch with her over the months, sharing updates on Bella and her puppies. He opened the message with a smile, curious to hear how the shelter was doing. Jack, I just wanted to let you know that Bella's story has inspired so many people. We've had an outpouring of support, and people are asking how they can help. We were even able to raise funds for more adoptions, and some of the other dogs that were once in Bella's position have found loving homes just like yours. I can't thank you enough for everything you've done for her. You've changed her life in ways you can't even imagine. Jack's heart swelled with emotion as he read the message. He had never expected this, never imagined that his simple act of kindness, offering food to a hungry dog, would ripple out and inspire so many others. He had thought he was just helping one dog and her puppies, but in doing so, he had unknowingly become a part of something much bigger. His heart swelled with pride as he thought of the other animals at the shelter who had found homes, all because of the love and care that Bella had sparked in him. Bella, sensing his change in mood, trotted over to him and nuzzled her head into his lap. Jack looked down at her, his eyes full of gratitude. She had given him so much more than he had ever expected. She had brought him closer to his own humanity, to the kind of love that didn't expect anything in return, the kind of love that just was. And now, she was giving him the joy of seeing her puppies grow into the same kind of beautiful creatures, strong, loving, and full of life. As the months continued, Jack's bond with Bella and her puppies only deepened. He became more involved in the shelter, volunteering his time to help other animals in need. He worked with Laura to spread awareness about the importance of adopting animals and providing them with loving homes. He knew that Bella's journey had been only one story in a much larger picture, and he was determined to help as many animals as possible find their own happy endings. One evening, as the first snowflakes of winter began to fall softly outside, Jack sat by the fire with Bella, curled up at his feet. The puppies were nestled together on their beds, their tiny bodies rising and falling with the rhythm of their breaths. Jack thought back to the busy road where he had first found Bella. He remembered her eyes, those eyes that had been filled with fear, uncertainty, and longing. He never could have imagined that, years later, he would be sitting in this warm, cozy house, surrounded by Bella and her puppies. He never could have imagined that their lives would be so intertwined, that they would become a family in the truest sense of the word. And as he looked at Bella, her head resting on his feet, her puppies sleeping peacefully beside her, Jack realized that he had found something far more precious than he had ever hoped for a family that was built not from blood, but from love, sacrifice, and shared journeys. He had found a home in their hearts, just as they had found a home in his. It was in that moment that Jack knew he would never let go. Bella and her puppies had found their forever home, and Jack had found a love that would last a lifetime.